This is Backyard Productions Incorporated, presenting you with instructions on fire building. The fires that we shall discuss are those commonly built with plants and plant products, such as grass, wood, bark, paper, leaves, pine needles, pine cones, and may include commercial charcoal. We shall not address the use of accelerants, such as gasoline or lighter fluid, and we shall not address special kinds of fires, such as electrical fires or grease fires. The presentation will focus on the fires that you would commonly build on an afternoon cookout, weekend campout, or longer camping trip. That is, fires for cooking, fellowship, warmth in cold weather, or signaling. The instruction will be presented in 3 parts as 3 separate videos that you can watch independently. The 3 separate videos will cover the following topics: the science behind fire building, or the basis of the basics, finding and preparing a safe area to build your campfire, and the basics of building a fire, including demonstrating the various materials necessary, building and lighting 2 example fire lays, and using the fire to cook a simple meal by boiling water. So, let's get started with part 1, the basis of the basics. At some point you have heard, or will hear, about the basics of building a campfire. You have to have enough dry tinder, kindling, and fuel wood. You have to build a good fire lay with adequate air circulation. And you have to have matches or some other heat source for lighting the fire. That's all well and good, but we believe that if you know something about the basis of these basics, you will be in a better position to be successful in building your campfire. The subject of our presentation, fire, is actually a chemical reaction that results in the uncontrolled release of energy from the burning material. The fires with which we will be dealing may be classed as one of 2 very general types: fast burning, those with a visible flame that we can use for fellowship or warmth, or slow burning, those with little or no visible flame but plenty of hot coals that we can use for cooking. Regardless of the type, these fires all start with the same basics that have the same basis. Okay then, let's proceed to discuss the basis of the basics for building your fire. Here we have a 3-legged stool. The 3 strong, adequate legs work together to put the stool upright and keep it standing. If even one of the legs is inadequate in any way, it breaks, is taken away, or was never there in the beginning, the stool cannot stand and falls. So, okay, but what does a 3-legged stool have to do with fire building? I'm glad you asked. Building a fire is like building a 3-legged stool. What? Just as you need 3 adequate and indispensable legs for the stool to stand, so you need 3 indispensable items in adequate quantity for a fire to start and continue to burn. Without the legs of fuel, oxygen, and heat in sufficient quantity, you have no fire. Let's consider each of these legs in turn. Fuel is the food that feeds the fire. It is the material that burns when combined with oxygen and the proper amount of heat. Without sufficient fuel, you cannot build a self-sustaining fire. Oxygen is the gas in the air that is required to combine with fuel to release the energy in the fuel. Without sufficient oxygen, there is no fire. Heat is required to raise the temperature of the fuel high enough to start the reaction with oxygen that results in release of energy, what we call burning. The temperature at which a fuel begins to burn is called the ignition temperature. Different fuels have different ignition temperatures that require different amounts of heat to begin the burning process. For instance, propane has a much lower ignition temperature than wood and begins to burn with much less heat. That's one reason why you have to be very careful with your propane stove. After the burn starts, heat is required from the burning fuel to raise the temperature of any newly added or nearby fuel to the ignition temperature to maintain the burn. Without sufficient heat, a fire cannot be started and cannot be maintained. Let's now take a look at some of the common fire building mistakes. The first big mistake we often see with those new to the fire building process is simply not having enough fuel on hand when they go to light the fire. They gather a small amount of fuel, may actually get the fire lit, then suddenly discover that they do not have enough fuel, and off they go to collect more. There's two problems with this action. You should never leave a fire unattended, so there had better be a buddy present while you are off collecting. By the time you get back, your baby fire has probably gone out and you have to start over. Always collect more fuel than you think you need. We often tell new scouts, collect what you think you need. Look at how much that is, then go out and collect that much more. After a few times doing this, most get the idea. Another common mistake is not having enough oxygen available to the fuel. The fire master packs the fuel too closely together or in too confined a space such that oxygen cannot reach all parts of the fuel, so the fire either does not start or goes out shortly after lighting. Just like you, the fire has to be able to breathe. Placement of fuel has to be airy enough to allow circulation of oxygen to all parts. The following two slides are examples of not enough oxygen. Here is an example of fuel packed too tightly together. The dry leaves on top and pine needles on the bottom, which could be good tinder with which to start a fire, have simply been plopped on the ground with no attempt to fluff them up. It is likely that sticks will next be placed on top of the leaves and pine needles, further compressing them and forcing out any remaining air. This situation will not allow you to start a fire. Sometimes we may try to start a fire in a small hole to minimize the impact of a fire on the land. After a fire is lit in the bottom of this confined space, the oxygen is quickly used up, and there is no easy access for fresh air to enter and bring more oxygen. The fire burns poorly or goes out. A solution for this problem is to dig a small trench out from the edge of the hole, indicated by the arrows, to allow fresh air easy access to enter the hole and bring more oxygen to the fire to keep it burning. Yet another common mistake is not providing for enough heat during and after initial lighting. First, you must supply enough heat to raise the temperature of the fuel to ignition temperature, and then add more fuel near enough to the burn that the new fuel is, in turn, raised to ignition temperature so that the fire becomes self-sustaining. The fuel cannot be too far apart, and here is the art of fire building that only comes with practice. If the fuel is packed too close together, you smother the fire for lack of oxygen. If the fuel is too far apart, the fire goes out for lack of enough heat to ignite the fuel not yet burning. Practice, practice, practice. Anything that prevents the fuel from reaching ignition temperature prevents burning. Examples are dampness. That is, water is a great conductor of heat and will absorb heat away from the fuel. And fuel too large for the heat source. This is why you cannot light a log with a match. The bulk of wood conducts heat away from the spot where the match is applied before the match can raise the temperature of the wood to ignition temperature. The following video illustrates how conduction of heat away from fuel prevents ignition and why your fuel should be dry. This clip shows the importance of water as a heat conductor. The cup above the flames is filled with water, which conducts heat away from the paper of the cup, and the paper never reaches ignition temperature. The cup on the left is empty. The paper soon reaches ignition temperature, and the cup is consumed by flames. The cup on the right will continue to stand unburned so long as water remains in the cup. This is the reason why your fuel must not be wet or even damp. So, now you know the basis for the basics of fire building. You have to have sufficient fuel, oxygen, and heat to start a fire and make it self-sustaining. This presentation should give you greater understanding and appreciation of discussions about tinder, kindling, fuel wood, fire lays, air circulation, and heat sources. We hope that knowledge of the basis, along with the basics, will help you to be a better fire master and allow you to have satisfying experiences building those cooking fires and campfires for fellowship and warmth.